Hey, this is Brookes. I've got some time, I've got an idea, and I've got a cup of coffee. So let's forge a character. A few weeks ago for my video on how to make chibi characters, I put together this Parcel illustration to show how the proportions of a regularly proportioned character can be sized down into a chibi one. So this week for Forge a Character, I thought, why not make a 3D sculpt of this chibi parcel? Here in zBrush, what I'm using to sculpt, I block out the basic proportions of the chibi forms. And even though the chibi character is very basic and blobby and round, very simplified, it's still really good to get a good understanding of realistic anatomy proportions so that when you change things up, they still look right even though they're in this really simplified form. What I'm really happy about is that this basic skeleton that I made for her, I saved on its own because it's a great jumping off point for future chibi characters. I could just start with this base mesh or base model and build the characters out from there. Now this week I committed a further instance of one of my biggest flaws in estimating the amount of time it would take to make this character. Really, I thought, hey, for Forge a Character this week, let me just make a simple sculpt. And I don't know what I thought was going to be simple about it. There's a lot of different forms in the hair and hat that require a lot of work, but honestly, the thing that took the most amount of work was the details on her clothing. Now, Parcel has these shoulder pauldron, or are they called epaulets, I think? And a lot of trim along her jacket and the long tails that go behind her. She has a belt and boots and gloves and a little pocket watch that hangs on the side. And even though all of these things are simplified, they take a lot more in 3D to properly show. What's interesting is that long before I was using zBrush, I was using 3D programs, modeling programs like Lightwave and Maya. And what's funny is that there are a lot of functions and ways to model that are a lot easier when you're starting with those boxy, blocky shapes and stretching points and polygons around. Now, anytime you see an object or part of an object turn pink or blue or green or some stark color with lots of little wireframe meshes going across it, that's me actually switching over to the polygon view there in zBrush just to see where things are, what the topology of the object is like, because zBrush is a digital sculpting program. It's almost like you're organically shaping clay within the software, but it's still good to know how those actual polygons, the triangles and squares that comprise the digital clay, how those are laying out and how many of them there are. Once you have an object made in zBrush, it's way too dense or detailed to be ported over and be used in something like a video game or an animation without completely changing that topology or simplifying it. So it's always good to know how those things are laying out and not just treat it like clay, but have a good idea or sense of what's happening. Now, one of the things that gave me the most trouble initially with this model was actually the mouth of the character. Now, because I'm not going all the way with the sculpt to making her posed and rigged and all those things and putting together expression controls, I really just wanted a static expression that would look nice and match the original illustration. But one of the things that I was doing was keeping the symmetry on with the mouth of the character. And it took me a really long time of struggling with a symmetrical mouth, and it ultimately just kept coming out looking a little bit creepy. And the reason for that is, an endearing or cute smile isn't necessarily symmetrical. And when the rest of the character is completely symmetrical, it just looks really odd. And the really nice thing was my wife walked by and I said, I'm really struggling with actually giving this character a mouth. And she said, well, why not just make it off in the corner? And that totally changed things. You'll see it coming up here. It's just an asymmetrical smile, and kind of what helps with that too is that it looks less realistic, and there's less kind of mental or visual scrutiny that you do at that point. I did a couple of different passes and attempts here with the little details, but ultimately what I did on the shoulders was just model out a couple of simple triangles and then mold them down. That's after what you're seeing right here. Now, this character Parcel is part of a comic that I'm working on and have been working on for a while, and I think it deserves its own video update in my Let's Make a Comic series. It's been a while since I put one of those out, and definitely the biggest reason for that has to do with really just the amount of work that goes into it, but also a ton of life changes that have happened since I started working on that comic. The amount of free time that I have has been drastically reduced, not to mention other optional side project things that I took on, like that daily Star Wars illustration series I did in December and things like that. And I also trying to do 2 videos a week here on this channel really is put a damper on what I'm able to do in my personal time, really, or time that I have for personal long-term projects. And that's something that I'd like to kind of work on, is making sure that I have time to work on things that are long-term instead of just making things that are, the quick weekly release schedule. So the mouth there looks a lot better when it's off to the side, and I added the tooth and mouth. I also poly painted the rest of the character with color, all of the colors that are sampled from the original illustration, and I really like how this sculpt turned out. If you haven't already seen the How to Make Chibi Characters video, I'll link it at the end of this one. And if you haven't already subscribed to Character Design Forge, I'm trying to make 2 new videos a week here on YouTube, so subscribing and hitting that bell notification will let you know when new videos are made available. My username is BagelDenizen across Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch, and if you'd like to support me in this channel, you can go to patreon.com/BagelDenizen and get things like a personalized video critique of your work from me and a ton of other stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating.